When the judge read my mother-in-law's restraining order aloud in court, she collapsed. But it wasn't the legal consequences that broke her. It was hearing my 7-year-old daughter's voice on the therapy recordings, trembling as she asked, "Does God really want me to die like Grandma Judith says?" My name is Bethany, and I'm about to tell you how a grandmother's twisted prophecies nearly destroyed my daughter's will to live, and why I had to secretly record 6 weeks of therapy sessions to prove that sometimes the devil doesn't come with horns and a pitchfork. Sometimes she comes with homemade cookies and a King James Bible. This happened just 8 months ago in our small Tennessee town, where everyone knows everyone, and family loyalty is supposed to come before everything else. Where taking your mother-in-law to court makes you the villain, not the woman who told a 7-year-old child that God had personally scheduled her death. The main people in this story are my daughter Meadow, who just wanted to help her grandma stir the gravy and hear stories about angels. My husband Colton, a high school football coach who couldn't see past his mother's religious manipulation until it was almost too late. And Judith, my mother-in-law, a 62-year-old retired church secretary who claimed God spoke to her every morning at exactly 5:17 a.m., telling her things about our family that would make your blood run cold. There's also Earl, my father-in-law, who runs the local hardware store and backed up every one of his wife's visions like they were written in stone. And my sister Fern, a family law attorney, who taught me that sometimes protecting your child means declaring war on the very people who should love them most. What you're about to hear isn't just about a toxic mother-in-law or family drama. This is about what happens when religious authority becomes a weapon, when a grandmother's jealousy disguises itself as divine revelation, and when a mother has to choose between keeping the peace and keeping her daughter alive. I was raised to respect my elders, to honor family above all else, to turn the other cheek. But when Judith looked my baby girl in the eyes and told her she'd prayed for her to disappear and that God had answered soon, every instinct I had as a mother went into overdrive. The problem was, in a family where Judith's visions had predicted everything from pregnancies to job losses, no one wanted to believe she'd crossed the line from prophet to predator. So I did what I had to do. I smiled at Sunday dinners while my daughter had nightmares about angels with black wings. I nodded politely while Judith testified about her morning conversations with the Almighty. And I secretly recorded every single word my daughter said to her therapist about what Grandma was really telling her when no one else was listening. Because here's what I learned. When someone uses God as a weapon against your child, you don't fight back with scripture or arguments about theology. You fight back with evidence, with recordings, with the horrified face of a judge who's hearing a 7-year-old practice being good at being dead because Grandma said it was God's will. This is that story. And before you judge me for what I did to protect my daughter, let me ask you something. What would you do if someone convinced your child that heaven had already picked their expiration date? Life in our small Tennessee town had always revolved around family Sunday dinners at Judith's house. Every week for 8 years of marriage, Colton and I would pack up Meadow and drive the 15 minutes to his childhood home, a 2-story colonial with white shutters and a wraparound porch that Judith kept decorated with seasonal wreaths she made herself. The house smelled perpetually of cinnamon and fresh bread, the kind of smell that should mean comfort, but eventually came to mean obligation. The dining room walls were covered with photos of Colton's glory days as quarterback for the county high school, his late sister Rebecca's wedding pictures from 15 years ago, and exactly one photo from our wedding, tucked in the corner behind a lamp. I noticed the placement on our first visit as newlyweds, but Colton had squeezed my hand and whispered, "Don't read into it, Beth. That's just where it fit." Judith had never quite warmed to me, though she was expert at making her coldness look like concern. Colton could have married the Brixton girl, she'd mentioned casually while passing the green beans. She's teaching Sunday school now, such a devoted young woman, never misses a service. She'd pause, letting the weight of that last part settle over the table like dust. But of course, we're blessed to have you, Bethany, even if you did take our Colton away from his calling to ministry. I'd grown used to her passive-aggressive comments, developing a kind of armor made of polite smiles and subject changes. Colton would squeeze my hand under the table, our silent signal that meant, "I know she's being awful, just let it go." His father, Earl, would grunt and ask about the football team's prospects, and the conversation would mercifully shift to safer ground. The truth was, I had taken Colton from ministry, if you wanted to look at it that way. We'd met when he was in seminary and I was finishing nursing school. He'd been volunteering at the hospital, praying with patients, when he walked into my pediatric ward and saw me singing to a baby with colic. I knew right then, he'd tell people at parties, that God had different plans for me. He dropped out of seminary the month before graduation to marry me, taking the coaching job at the local high school instead. Judith had worn black to our wedding, claiming she was still mourning Rebecca, who died 3 years prior. Despite the tension, Meadow adored these gatherings. She'd bounce in her booster seat during the drive over, listing all the things she wanted to tell Grandma. Judith. She lets me stir the gravy, Meadow would tell me excitedly, her blonde curls bouncing, and she tells me stories about angels and how Aunt Rebecca is watching over us from heaven. She says, I have Aunt Rebecca's eyes. Earl was easier to love, a quiet man who'd slip Meadow $5 bills and teach her card tricks, while the women cleaned up after dinner. He'd built her a dollhouse in his workshop, spending months on the tiny furniture and perfect miniature shingles. Every princess needs a castle, he'd said when he presented it on her 5th birthday, and I'd felt my heart soften toward him, despite his unwavering loyalty to his wife's peculiarities. The transformation started subtly after I missed 3 Sunday dinners in a row due to hospital shifts during a particularly severe flu outbreak. The pediatric ward was overwhelmed, and I'd volunteered for extra shifts when 2 other nurses got sick. Working on the Lord's Day, Judith would mutter when we finally returned. Some priorities never change, I suppose. Mom, Bethany's saving lives, Colton had defended me half-heartedly. That's God's work, too. Is it? Judith had responded, her voice sweet as honey. Or is it putting career before family, before faith? I just worry about little Meadow growing up without proper guidance. A mother should be home on Sundays. The comments escalated slowly, like water heating degree by degree until suddenly it's boiling. She started scheduling special grandmother-granddaughter time during my shifts, picking Meadow up for Saturday sleepovers that stretched into Sunday afternoon. You rest, she'd tell me with that pinched smile. I know those long shifts must be exhausting. Meadow and I will have our special time. Colton thought it was wonderful. Mom's really trying, he'd said one night as we got ready for bed. She's making an effort with Meadow. Maybe she's finally accepting our life choices. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that Judith's increased interest in our daughter was genuine grandmother love, not some calculated attempt to compensate for the daughter-in-law she wished she didn't have. But mothers know. We can sense danger to our children like animals sense earthquakes, a deep rumbling of wrong that starts in our bones before our minds catch up. I should have trusted that instinct sooner. I should have paid attention to the way Meadow started asking strange questions about heaven, about whether people knew they were going to die before it happened, about whether God really had a big book with everyone's death date already written down. But I didn't. I was too busy trying to keep the peace, too concerned with being the bigger person, too afraid of being the difficult daughter-in-law who caused family drama. That hesitation would haunt me for months to come, because while I was playing nice, Judith was playing prophet, and my 7-year-old daughter was her most devoted congregation of one. Everything changed on Palm Sunday. I'd finally gotten a day off after working 12 straight days, and we arrived at Judith's house to find Meadow sitting alone on the porch steps, her small body shaking with silent sobs. Her Sunday dress, the yellow one with daisies that she'd picked out herself, was crumpled where she'd been hugging her knees to her chest. "Honey, what's wrong?" I knelt beside her, feeling the cold concrete through my dress. Her face was blotchy red, and she wouldn't meet my eyes. "Grandma Judith says I'm going away soon," she whispered, her voice so small I had to lean in to hear it. She said she asked God about me, and he told her I'd disappear. My blood ran cold, but I kept my voice steady. "What exactly did Grandma say, sweetie? Tell Mommy everything." Meadow's bottom lip trembled. She was teaching me the special prayer, the one she does every morning. She said she's been praying about me because she loves Daddy so much. She said she asked God to make me disappear so Daddy could have a better family, and God said, "Soon." She said it means I'm going to heaven to be with Aunt Rebecca. I stood up so fast my vision went black at the edges. Through the front window, I could see Judith in her kitchen, calmly icing a cake like she hadn't just told my child she was marked for death. I found Colton in the garage with Earl, both of them bent over an old truck engine. "We need to leave. Now," I said. "Beth, what's wrong? Dinner's in 20 minutes. "Your mother told Meadow she's going to die," I said flatly. "She told our 7-year-old that God wants her to disappear." Colton laughed nervously, wiping his greasy hands on a rag. "Come on, Mom gets dramatic about her prayer visions. You know how she is. She doesn't mean anything by it." "She told our daughter that she prayed for her to disappear." Earl straightened up, his face stern. "Now, Bethany, Judith's always had the gift of prophecy. She predicted Rebecca's car accident, didn't she? Knew something bad was coming 3 days before it happened. You shouldn't dismiss the Lord's messages just because they make you uncomfortable." "Are you seriously defending this?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "She's traumatizing Meadow." "She's preparing her spiritually," Earl said calmly. "Children should know about heaven. Death is a part of life." That night was the first nightmare. Meadow woke up at 2 a.m. screaming so loudly that Colton fell out of bed trying to get to her room. "The angels are coming to take me," she sobbed, clinging to my neck so tightly I could barely breathe. "I can see their black wings. I don't want to disappear. Please, Mommy, I don't want to go." I held her while she shook, feeling her little heart racing against my chest. Colton stood in the doorway looking lost. "It's just a bad dream, Princess," he said weakly. "It's not just a dream," Meadow wailed. "Grandma said God already decided. She said he wrote it in his big book and no one can change it." This continued every single night for 2 weeks. Dark circles formed under Meadow's eyes like bruises. She stopped eating breakfast, pushing her cereal around the bowl. When I asked why, she said in that matter-of-fact way children have, "Why eat if I'm going away? Grandma said they don't have regular food in heaven." She started giving away her toys at school. Her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, called me concerned. Meadow gave her favorite doll to Lucy today and said she wouldn't need it much longer. "Is everything okay at home?" When I suggested we skip Sunday dinner, Colton exploded. "You're overreacting. Mom's been having visions since I was a kid. She predicted Aunt Ruth's pregnancy and Pastor Dalton's retirement. She knew about the fire at the church before it happened. You can't punish her for her faith." "I'm not punishing her for her faith," I shot back. "I'm protecting our daughter from psychological abuse." "Abuse?" Colton's face went red. "That's my mother you're talking about. She loves Meadow. Love doesn't tell a child they're going to die." "She didn't say die. She said disappear. Maybe she meant something else entirely. Maybe Meadow misunderstood." But I knew Meadow hadn't misunderstood when I found her in her closet the next day, practicing being still. "What are you doing, baby?" "I'm practicing being dead," she said simply. "Grandma said it won't hurt if I'm ready. So I'm practicing being very, very quiet and still, so God will know I'm ready when he comes to get me." That image of my 7-year-old daughter, lying perfectly still on her closet floor with her hands folded over her chest like a corpse, practicing for her own death, will haunt me until the day I actually die. And in that moment, I knew that keeping the family peace was no longer an option. Judith had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and if Colton wouldn't protect our daughter, I would have to do it myself. After the 3rd week of nightmares, I made 2 decisions that would change everything. First, I called the hospital's child psychology department and scheduled Meadow with Dr. Penelope Ashford, a specialist who'd worked with traumatized children for 20 years. Second, I drove to Best Buy and bought a tiny digital voice recorder that could fit in the palm of my hand. "This is completely legal," my sister Fern assured me over coffee at my kitchen table that Thursday morning. She'd driven 2 hours from Nashville the moment I called her. "You're recording your minor child's medical appointments as her guardian. Tennessee is a one-party consent state, and you're acting in your daughter's best interest. Keep everything documented, Beth. Every session, every word." "Colton will lose his mind if he finds out," I said, staring at the small silver device. "Colton already lost his mind when he chose his mother's delusions over his daughter's mental health," Fern said bluntly. "Look, I've seen this in custody cases before. Religious abuse is Real, but it's nearly impossible to prove without documentation. Judges don't want to appear biased against someone's faith. You need evidence that shows actual harm, not just inappropriate religious instruction. Dr. Ashford's office was designed to feel safe, with soft yellow walls and bins of toys organized by type. She was a gentle woman with silver hair pulled back in a loose bun, wearing a cardigan with tiny butterflies embroidered on it. Meadow noticed them immediately. "I like butterflies too," Meadow said quietly. "Would you like to draw some while we talk?" Dr. Ashford asked, setting out paper and a box of pristine crayons. "Your mom can sit right over there in the corner where you can see her." I positioned myself in the chair, my purse on my lap with the recorder inside, running. My hands shook slightly as I pretended to read a magazine. "So, Meadow, your mom tells me you've been having some scary dreams," Dr. Ashford began gently. "Can you tell me about them?" Meadow drew a black circle on the paper. "They're not dreams. They're prophecies. That's what Grandma Judith calls them. She says God sends them to special people." "And what do these prophecies show you?" "Angels coming to take me away. Grandma says God talks to her every morning at 5:17. She sets her special alarm for it. She goes to her prayer closet and he tells her things." Meadow switched to a gray crayon, adding wings to the black circle. "She told me he's been showing her visions of Daddy being happier without me. He's smiling in a big house with other kids who are better than me." Dr. Ashford's expression remained neutral, but I saw her hand tighten on her pen. "How does that make you feel when Grandma tells you these things?" "Scared, but also sorry for Daddy. I tried being really good so God would change his mind. I cleaned my room perfect and didn't ask for dessert ever. I didn't complain when my stomach hurt or when I was tired. But Grandma said God's decisions are final. She said even Jesus couldn't change God's mind about dying." Over 6 weeks, the sessions revealed a systematic pattern of psychological manipulation. The recorder captured everything. Judith had been telling Meadow these things privately during their kitchen time, always when I was at work or busy with something else. "Don't tell Mommy," she'd instructed. "She doesn't understand God's plan because she doesn't have the gift. She's not chosen like we are." In the third session, Meadow revealed that Judith had given her a funeral prayer card to practice for when you're gone and taught her to say goodbye to her toys because you can't take earthly things to heaven. She'd told Meadow that her disappearance would be God's gift to Daddy so he could start over with a godly wife who puts family first. "Grandma showed me pictures of Daddy when he was young," Meadow told Dr. Ashford during the fourth session. "She said he was meant to be a pastor until Mommy trapped him. She said I was the trap, but God was going to free him soon." By the fifth session, Dr. Ashford couldn't hide her concern anymore. "Meadow, has Grandma ever told you when this disappearing might happen?" "Before my 8th birthday," Meadow said matter-of-factly. "She said God promised I wouldn't have to suffer through another year. She's teaching me the special prayers to say so the angels will recognize me when they come." After that session, Dr. Ashford asked to speak with me privately. "Mrs. Brenner, this is severe emotional abuse disguised as religious instruction. Your daughter is showing signs of severe thanatophobia, death anxiety, and early childhood depression. She's essentially being groomed to accept her own death. I'm mandated to report this, but I strongly encourage you to seek legal protection immediately." I sat in my car in the parking lot listening to the recording on my phone with tears streaming down my face. My baby's voice, so small and accepting of her supposed fate, destroyed something in me. But it also built something else, a determination that would let me burn every bridge, destroy every relationship, and face any consequence to save my daughter from the woman who claimed to love her while preparing her for death. The custody hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in May. Fern had filed for an emergency protection order and supervised visitation only, citing religious-based psychological abuse. The courtroom was packed with Colton's extended family, his aunts, uncles, cousins, and half the congregation from Judith's church. They sat behind her like an army, their faces hard with judgment. "This is ridiculous," Judith announced loudly as she took her seat, wearing her best church dress and a gold cross necklace. "Persecuted for my faith in my own country. This is what happens when you let a godless woman into your family." Judge Martha Hammond, a stern woman in her 60s with steel gray hair, called the court to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. This is a hearing regarding the welfare of minor child Meadow Brenner. I will have order and respect in my courtroom." Fern presented our case methodically. First, she called Dr. Ashford to the stand. The therapist's credentials were impeccable. 20 years of experience, published research on childhood trauma, expert witness in over 50 cases. "Dr. Ashford, can you describe Meadow Brenner's condition when she first came to you?" Fern asked. Meadow presented with severe death anxiety, insomnia, and symptoms consistent with psychological trauma. She had developed ritualistic behaviors around death preparation and showed signs of early childhood depression. What was the source of this trauma? Based on 6 weeks of therapy sessions, the trauma stems from her paternal grandmother's repeated assertions that God had told her Meadow would die before her 8th birthday. A murmur ran through Judith's supporters. She stood up abruptly. "That's a lie. I never said, die." "Mrs. Brenner, you will remain seated and silent or be removed from this courtroom," Judge Hammond warned. Fern nodded to the bailiff, who set up an audio system. "Your Honor, I'd like to present recordings from Meadow's therapy sessions, legally obtained by her mother as her guardian during medical treatment." The courtroom fell silent as the bailiff pressed play. Meadow's small voice filled the room, clear and innocent. "Grandma Judith says, when I disappear, Daddy can marry Miss Brixton from church and have normal babies. She says I'm broken because Mommy worked too much when she was pregnant with me. She said that's why God is taking me back, like a recall on a broken toy." Colton's face went white. He stared at his mother, who was shaking her head frantically. The recording continued. Dr. Ashford's gentle voice asked, "Did Grandma tell you what disappearing means?" "It means going to heaven to be with Aunt Rebecca. She said Aunt Rebecca is lonely and needs a little girl to take care of. Grandma gave me Aunt Rebecca's funeral card so I could practice the prayers. She said if I memorize them, dying won't hurt as much." Several people in the gallery gasped. One of Colton's aunts got up and left. The next recording was even more damaging. "I asked Grandma if disappearing hurts," Meadow's voice said. "She said only if you're not ready for God. So I try to be ready. I practice being very still in bed so I'll be good at being dead. Grandma says God likes children who don't fight His plan." "That's taken out of context," Judith shouted, jumping to her feet again. "I was preparing her spiritually for the reality of mortality. Everyone dies." "Not everyone tells a 7-year-old she's been scheduled for death by God," Judge Hammond said coldly. "Sit down, Mrs. Brenner, or I'll hold you in contempt." Dr. Ashford's testimony continued for another 20 minutes, detailing the psychological damage. This child was essentially groomed to accept her own death as inevitable and imminent. She stopped eating regularly, gave away possessions, and developed thanatophobia so severe she would practice being dead. This is one of the most severe cases of religious-based psychological abuse I've encountered in my career. When Judith took the stand in her own defense, she was defiant. "I have the gift of prophecy. God speaks to me. I've predicted dozens of events in this family. Ask anyone." "Mrs. Brenner," Fern questioned, "did you tell your granddaughter that God wanted her to disappear?" God's messages aren't always clear. Sometimes disappear means transformation, moving away, change. "Did you give a 7-year-old child a funeral card to practice prayers for her own death?" "I gave her Rebecca's memorial card as a connection to her aunt. Did you tell her she was broken, that her father would be happier without her?" Judith's voice rose to a near shriek. "I told her the truth. That child disrupted God's plan for my son. He was meant for ministry, not to be trapped by some woman who puts career before family. If God wants to correct that mistake, who am I to question His will?" The courtroom erupted. Judge Hammond slammed her gavel repeatedly. When order was restored, her voice was ice. "I've heard enough. Mrs. Judith Brenner, Mr. Earl Brenner, and any family member who supports their actions are hereby prohibited from unsupervised contact with the minor child until she reaches the age of 18. Any violation will result in immediate criminal charges. This court also orders mandatory psychological evaluation for Mrs. Judith Brenner and family therapy for all parties." As the gavel fell with finality, Judith collapsed into Earl's arms, sobbing. But her tears weren't from remorse. As we walked past, she hissed at me. When my vision comes true, you'll know God's judgment is real." "Your vision," I said quietly, holding Meadow's hand tightly, "was never from God. It was from your own bitter heart that couldn't accept your son loved someone you didn't choose." 2 days after the court ruling at 2 a.m., our doorbell camera sent an alert to my phone. Colton and I watched in disbelief as 8 figures stood on our porch in the darkness. Judith was at the front holding what looked like a vial of blessed oil, making crosses on our door while the others formed a prayer circle. Earl held a Bible over his head. Colton's aunts and cousins swayed with their eyes closed, and we could hear them through the camera's audio, speaking in tongues and calling for the demon Bethany to release her hold on this family. 517, Colton! Judith suddenly screamed at the camera, knowing we were watching. "God still speaks at 517. He tells me the truth about that woman's wickedness. She's turned you against your calling." I had already dialed 911. The police arrived within 8 minutes, their lights cutting through the prayer circle like a blade. As they led Judith away in handcuffs for violating the protection order, she called out one last time, "The prophecy stands. God's will cannot be stopped by man's courts." Earl followed in his own car to post bail. The rest of the family scattered, but not before Colton's cousin Mark shouted that we'd brought shame to the family name. 3 months later, Colton filed for divorce from me, but not for the reason his mother would have wanted. We sat in our kitchen after Meadow was asleep, and he looked broken in a way I'd never seen before. "I can't be married to someone who was right about my family when I was so wrong," he said, his voice hollow. "Every time I look at you, I remember how I failed to protect Meadow, how I chose my mother's delusions over our daughter's safety. I called you dramatic. I said you were overreacting while our baby was practicing being dead. Colton, we can work through this. Therapy exists for exactly these situations." He shook his head. "I need to rebuild myself from scratch, Beth. Away from here, away from them, away from everything that made me think it was normal for my mother to predict deaths and call it prophecy. I've been in that sickness my whole life. I need to find out who I am without it." We worked out generous joint custody with one ironclad stipulation. His family had zero access to Meadow. Colton moved 2 towns over, took a coaching job at a different school, and started intensive therapy. He's been in treatment for 8 months now, unpacking years of what his therapist calls religious trauma and coercive control disguised as faith. "I'm starting to remember things," he told me during a recent custody exchange. "Mom's prophecies about Rebecca before the accident. She'd been telling Rebecca for months that God showed her darkness around her. Rebecca was so anxious those last few months, Mom had her convinced something terrible was coming. It became a self-fulfilling prophecy when Rebecca was too nervous to drive safely." Meadow is 9 now. The nightmares stopped after a year of therapy with Dr. Ashford. She still sees her every other week, working through the trauma of being told she was marked for death by someone who claimed to love her. Last week, she asked me something that showed how far she's come. "Mom, do you think Grandma Judith still wakes up at 5:17? "Probably, honey. Why do you ask?" "That's really sad," she said, wisdom beyond her years in her voice. "Imagine spending every morning listening for a voice that was never really there, instead of just loving the family right in front of you. She missed so much real love trying to hear fake messages." Sometimes the most dangerous lies come wrapped in prayer. I learned that protecting your child isn't just about keeping them physically safe. It's about guarding their mind and spirit from those who would use God's name to justify their own darkness, their own jealousy, their own need for control, even if those people share your last name, especially then. The restraining order is still active and will remain so for 9 more years. Judith sends letters sometimes, pages of biblical verses about forgiveness and honoring thy mother and father. I keep them all, unopened, in a box marked evidence. My lawyer says to maintain everything in case they try to challenge the order. Last month, Meadow's teacher called to tell me she'd written an essay about bravery for a class assignment. She wrote about me. "My mom fought a whole army with just a recorder and the truth," she wrote. "She taught me that sometimes the scariest monsters pretend to be angels, and the bravest thing you can do is stop believing in false prophecies. Because when someone tells you who they are, when they show you their darkness disguised as light, When they target your child with their poison wrapped in scripture, believe them the first time, and then fight like hell to protect what matters most. Your child's life is worth more than family peace. Their mental health is worth more than keeping secrets. Their future is worth more than anyone's comfort. If this story resonated with you, if you've dealt with toxic family members who hide behind religion, or if you believe that protecting children comes before protecting adult egos, please share this video. Leave a comment with your own experiences because you're not alone in this fight. And subscribe to this channel for more real stories about families, survival, and the courage it takes to stand up to those who should have protected us but didn't.